cool. So that's the first time I've used a song. I wanted to make sure everything was squared away on Facebook, and it is. So hi, everybody. As people join, I didn't say this last week, but let us know that you're here. And I'm going to, I just would love to know who's here. And definitely, pepper us with questions and comments. And
so many questions.
Yeah, we got to keep this going. I was just telling Rebecca, I really hate awkward silence. I'm terrible. I will fill up any space. So you will help me not do that. Oh, yay, Dina. Dina's awesome. So
We've already got
one. And then, as long as I'm with it, I can make the comments show up. Yes, and Kina's here.
Oh, cool.
But I'll stop commenting on everything. So I'm Lauren, and this is Rebecca. I'm going to let Rebecca introduce herself in a minute. I'm one of the associate pastors at Messiah, for anybody who may be watching who doesn't already know this. And we are doing a weekly, kind of interview, but really it's a chat, a discussion on sort of our wilderness stories, because anytime in the Bible where we see God delivering God's people, they've always gone through a detour, and that detour is usually in the wilderness. And so it's so cool when we can hear about other people's wilderness stories, because it can strengthen us and our faith when we are experiencing some of our own wilderness, even when it's not exactly the same. We can somehow connect to that. So that's sort of what we're doing here. Rebecca is in my Sunday morning group, and our kids know each other. We live in the same neighborhood. She's been attending Messiah. She does the choir. So I'm going to let her take it away.
Yeah, the church will know me whether we're meeting in session or not.
Yes.
So hi, I'm Rebecca. Yeah, like Lauren said, it's been about a year since we've been sort of in relationship with Messiah. I am, for my day job, I'm a licensed professional counselor, but I also have two beautiful, wonderful, smart, and quippy children who are 10 and 8, both girls, both keeping me on my toes all the time. And I'm married to my best friend of 20 years, Michael. And let's see, I recently got my license in counseling about 2 years ago. So part of my wilderness story sort of involves that progression. And certainly my family of origin does as well. And I can get more into that as we go along. But that's my basic bio, the 5-minute version, right?
Awesome. Wait, you should tell us one thing that John and I have commented that is just really cool, a cool fact. What did you major in?
Oh, yeah. So I got my undergraduate degree in interdisciplinary Black studies, which was a study of both African American history and the diaspora as well. So, understanding and respecting perspectives from the African traditions, as well as, learning about things like the Gullah community in South Carolina, and learning about sort of our national relationship with racism and things along that line. So
kind of fascinating, because that's really before we were doing all this talk about what's been happening, So what did you hope to do with that?
So I always knew, well, I guess the short story is I always knew I wanted to do therapy. I knew that was something that God was calling me to, like helping people through counsel. I didn't know what that would look like in terms of a job, really, but I knew that I needed to be responsive to not just my own experience, but to really learn about some experiences that really rubbed me in a hard way when I was growing up, because I lived in a very segregated environment growing up. I lived in North Alexandria. So, I went to a public high school where all the white kids were on one side and they took certain classes, and then everybody else was kind of at the high school. And so it was awful. I mean, it was a terrible reality, but I guess my experience as a white woman, right? I mean, is a very complicated and loaded one, and one of certainly of a lot of privilege. So I hadn't have to encounter some of the ugliness of my own culture until I really was getting older and understanding sort of the nuances of systemic racism and all of those things. So I don't want to tell too much of my story right now, but just I was drawn in by my dear friend in college to become the the great white hope of the gospel choir because I didn't make it into the Christian a cappella group. And she was like, "Oh my gosh, you can sing and you love Jesus, so come be in the gospel choir." And so by responding to the Lord's call on my life in that way, and really just hearing His voice in my friend, like I met some really just amazing women, who had a very different cultural experience than mine. And I won't say that I'm completely woken up yet, but I'm trying to be. And
Mhm.
certainly that experience taught me a lot about privilege and sort of how to check it, but then also how to advocate in a way that's useful, right? As a white woman, right, who has all the privilege in the entire world for the most part. I mean, we get it pretty easy. I mean, yes, we're still women, but we're white women, which is very different. Uh and so it's, I guess, unpacking that was like a big task of my college experience. Um, so
That's so cool.
that's
You
that's a
know,
short story. I don't know if I can ever tell that as a short story, but
I
there'll be
mean,
more of that in
that
my
kind
narrative.
of, yeah, I'll have to like ask you more later. Um, I
We'll
don't
do
want
8
to
of
forget.
these, right? We'll just
Yeah,
keep going.
yeah, it'll be the Rebecca season of this series. I'm going to open us in prayer. I thought
Absolutely.
that
Let's
this
do
week,
that.
and it'll just be really short, and then we'll start. So,
Cool.
Almighty God, thank you so much for Rebecca for being willing to kind of like tell us about herself online, which is just putting it all out there so that we can learn and grow and be inspired and all of that. I just ask that you bless Rebecca, bless this time, bless anybody who's listening to this live or later, that you might speak to us through these stories that we hear. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right. So the
All
first
right.
thing I want to ask you is, okay. So the first thing I want to ask you, if you had to say that you are like relating or similar to a person in the Bible, who would it be and why?
Oh, that actually is kind of a tough question.
Yeah,
I
it
mean,
is.
I want to believe that I'm a little bit like Hannah and that, I had this baby of a dream and I had to give it back to God and let him do what he wanted to do with it. And it took a lot of time and the power was kind of out of my hands. So I like to think I'm a little bit like her.
Yeah.
Um, but I also like to kind of think that I'm a little bit of like one of those warrior women that's willing to go, stab people with posts as needed to, bring God's
Oh
justice. So
my gosh.
I don't know.
Yeah,
It's
that's
somewhere in
awesome.
between the two of
Well,
those.
like the reason I ask is because one of the classes I took, I said this last week, but they
Mhm.
say like when you really identify with a person in the Bible, like a certain person, a lot of times they parallel like our own call. We're all called in some way. And so it's just really interesting to explore that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
And I think that, I mean, my first daughter's name is Hannah, for that reason,
okay.
because I really
That's
felt
so
like
good.
God had spoken to me about that like this girl is not yours. She's
Yeah,
mine. And I've got a plan and a purpose for her, and you have to let go of her dreams as well and let her be mine.
yeah,
So that was kind of the name that was given to me for her.
that was really cool. Okay,
Yeah.
your only other really challenging question is if you had to pick like a scripture or a past, like just a verse or whatever,
Mhm.
do you have one that you kind of like hold close as for like your life that it's spoken to over
Sure.
and over again?
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think the verse that I think always speaks to me, Matthew 22:37 through 40, where, they're trying to trap Jesus and say, oh, there's all these rules, and which rules are the most important? And he just says, love God and love your neighbor.
Yeah,
And that is the goal. And I have a really fun translation from the message I like to read, if you don't mind, since
yeah, I
I,
don't mind at all.
have you here.
Yeah.
You might as well
Okay.
read it
I always
properly,
need to
right,
be
from the
refreshed.
Bible. It's always good to hear it fresh, even though we've heard it
Yeah,
87 bazillion
yeah.
times in church. All right, so here's a translation from the message because I like the message
Okay.
sometimes. You could wonder
I
why,
love it
right?
too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So Jesus said, "Love the Lord your God with all your passion and prayer and intelligence. This is the most important, the first on any list. But there is a second to set alongside it. Love others as well as you love yourself. These two commandments are pegs. Everything in God's law and the prophets hangs from them."
That's so good. I love that.
So that's what I go with. Lead with love, right?
Yeah,
That's
and I like that word passion too, just like,
yeah. And
you know,
intelligence, right? We're supposed to use
yeah,
all the gifts that God gave us to love him and to serve him and to love and serve others. So
I know. I think some
we don't
people
have
don't
to dumb
realize,
ourselves down.
yeah, and I think some people don't really realize that they have gifts, but God says like he's given all of us gifts and
Absolutely.
we all can use them. And it's very exciting and it's very energizing when you find that little thing. Okay, so we're doing wilderness stories. So that's always kind of like a hard thing to just jump into. It is it's like heavy, sometimes,
Yeah,
and sometimes it's not, and sometimes it's recent, and sometimes it's long ago.
absolutely.
And for anybody watching, like I would love more people to do this with me. So some people's stories are just ginormous, and other people's stories are like smaller, but they all have a huge impact, and they all help other people. It's like a gift that we're offering, to be able to receive this from Rebecca is like we're receiving a gift. So
Oh,
just to know that, like, your story, all stories matter.
true.
And Catherine said that she loves that version of the message translation you read.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
So Rebecca, like, how do you want to start into this? One of the questions that I ask is like, when did God become more than just a word to you? And I think
Sure,
maybe that
absolutely.
question resonates because a lot of times God becomes more than just a word to us at a time where we're like searching.
Sure.
So
So
how would
I'd
you?
like to begin my story as I love using similes and metaphors because that's who I am. So I'll do my introduction to who I am and how my story sort of started, and I'll add the simile in there. So for me, you know, growing up, I grew up in a Christian evangelical. Um, my parents were fairly new Christians when they got married. So by the time they had me, they were maybe like 10 years into their faith journey. They were not uh, baby Christians by any stretch of the imagination, but they were still kind of trying to figure
Mhm.
things out and weren't asking a lot of difficult questions. And partly that was because of just the journeys that they had with their parents. But um, anyway, so that I grew up with some pretty fundamental rules about how to behave and who God was. So I sort of equate it to my house when I was growing up. See, we had this wonderful formal living room, and you would come into the foyer and it would open up into this beautiful dark stained wood flooring, and it is all this furniture that my parents had spent, a good chunk of money on, back then to buy this colonial style elaborate furniture. To this day, I tease them about it being dollhouse furniture because my husband and I are tall and we're well rounded, and this furniture is quite small. But I always remember that couch in that set. It was sort of a light blue velvet. Okay, velvet is not a very forgiving fabric if you spill something on it. So my parents, that was the fancy couch. Like, we did not sit on that couch. We got to sit on that couch like 3 times a year at Christmas time if we had like special company, and usually we were relegated to the floor because if there were 4 adults, then that would be the 4 chairs, and then we would sit on the floor and worship at the feet of the visitors or something. But we never got to really enjoy that sofa, or settee or whatever fancy word you
But
want to
like,
give it.
also a question: how do
Yeah.
parents get their kids not to sit on that couch? Because my kids don't listen to me.
My parents didn't play around with rules that much,
Oh,
so if my parents said something, I did it. Also, I
okay.
think there was just an expectation because there were other couches, right? So there was
Yeah.
the living room couch, and that one was sort of the mid-grade couch, right? And this is probably the relationship I thought I had with maybe Mary or in the Saints, right? It was the living room couch. Like, maybe I could understand them a little bit better and access them a little bit better because, they were more like me. So I could sit with them and be comfortable with them. And then we had the final couch, which is in the basement. The living room couch was kind of nice for casual company, people who knew us well. And then there was the basement couch, and nobody sat on that basement couch. That was the sick couch. When you were sick, that's where you would go. You would go down to the basement and you would lay down
Oh
on
my
this couch.
God.
And it was like the 70s couch, with the plaid, and it was dreadful. But it was comfortable. And it was
Yeah.
a place that you could go and you could just be however you were that day, and you could be comfortable and supported and safe. And I guess as a child, I always kind of knew that I wanted God to be that comfortable couch, but he just
Mhm.
wasn't. He was that blue velvet thing, right? He was always there. He was always present. It's not like he was going to go anywhere, but he wasn't for every day. He wasn't for being sick or being dirty or being unclean. And so, in order to sit on that couch, I remember like every time I sat on that couch, we were dressed up, taffeta dresses and, dress pants and things of that nature. It was always a dressed up or special occasion to sit on that sofa. And I think what I realized, and I may be misremembering that, but I'm going with it for the sake of
Yeah, it's
this
perfect.
the story because it I only remember having to be on my best behavior when I was on that sofa. Well, now it's a casual piece of furniture in my parents' house, and I think that represents their faith journey as well. But at the time, that was very special and very neat. And if God forbid you spilled anything on it, right? Because that would just be horrific. Because this was something
Mhm.
of high cost and high value. And so that's sort of the allegory I'm going to be using as we talk about this. But just this idea that God was always present, always available in theory, right? Nobody was like roping off the couch and saying, no, you can't sit on it. But it was just sort of an unspoken rule that, like, if you were dirty or you were like going to do something messy, you didn't do it on this couch.
Yeah, that reminds me, sorry to interject, but
No.
it reminds me like when I was maybe a freshman in college and I had seen a counselor and I was just like in a lot of pain. And she said, close your eyes and, think of where you are and like what you're looking like. So I had imagined myself sort of like sitting on the ground crying, like, sort of huddled up. She's like, okay, now God comes in the room. Like, how do you see God? And I imagined God like there on the other side of the room, like looking at me. And she's like, well,
Yeah.
what if God is like right down with you? And I was like,
Mhm.
oh,
Oh,
it could
wow.
be the whole image of God. How do we imagine God in our times? Anyway, keep going.
Yeah. So, saying more a little bit about my background, right? I grew up, in the characteristic, WASP home. I had, my two parents. I'm the last living of my parents' three children. My brother was born first, and then they had my sister who died 4 days in the hospital after
Hmm.
4 days after birth.
Wow.
And then I was born about 3 years, 3.5 years after my brother. Um, and so now there's a cemetery where two of my siblings are buried, and one day there's a spot for me, apparently. Um, well, I don't like to think about that too much. I might go live
Mhm.
with the fries in the ground. I don't know. I haven't figured that one out yet. Maybe I'll take Michael with me. Just
Yeah.
we're going at the same time. We're just gonna jump out of a plane at 95. Um, but yeah, it was growing up was really hard. My mother is a woman who's familiar with loss and pain and abuse as a child.
Mhm.
Her mother abused her in many ways. Some more subtle than others, like not doing
Mhm.
the laundry, so she didn't have fresh underwear for school, so she would go without them, and then kids would tease her or look up her dress and things like that. Very, very intensive
Yeah.
experiences for a young child to have. So she's really a great mom. I really have no complaints about my mother, but in all families there are things, right? And so in her woundedness, I think she was still figuring out who the heck she was in her parenting, like I'm figuring out who the heck I am in my parenting.
Mhm.
Like all mothers, I think. We all struggle with that.
Yeah.
Um, but my mother, I think more so than she let us know at the time. It was all very passive and hidden. Um, but my brother was a difficult child. Always was. Came out of the womb that way. He was born when 4 Mile Island melted down, so that sort of parallels
Hmm.
um, the experience that my parents felt about him, and that was part of the narrative they told too, just
Hmm.
how difficult this child was. Um, as time went on, they diagnosed him with all kinds of things like ADHD and bipolar one disorder, which we think he probably had a little bit of all of that. Um,
Mhm.
but at the time, like nobody knew. Nobody was diagnosing kids in the 90s. I mean, they were just like, oh, that kid's a problem. Let's get him out of the school. So thankfully, we're doing a little bit better at doing that now as a profession. But at the time, like, he really struggled. And so I always grew up knowing God was there and present. And we went to church. I mean, I've probably gone to 80 million different church traditions in my life. I mean, I couldn't even remember. That's how many I'd been to, that I was like forgetting them as I was like trying to think through my history with the church. But so we grew up that way.
And it was like, it sounds like it was kind of like a lonely household to be in at that time.
We had our moments. Like my parents always really tried to make me feel special and cared for, and that I was valuable. But my brother took a lot of attention, and it was around, I believe I was 9 years old at the time, and my brother had he was starting to develop some tendencies. He was, almost 13 at the time, and my parents left us alone. And during that incident, he had sexually assaulted me on more than one occasion. And so at that point, there was a big turning point in our relationship, because he was, now kind of a villain. I mean, he'd always been a little bit of a villain in my story, but I always tried to love him and, be sisterly and kind. But now I was like, oh my goodness. But the scene that I've set for you, right? These evangelical parents, we at the time were going to an Episcopal church, which was very conservative in terms of its, victim shaming. So there was a lot of like, take responsibility for your own actions talk. And I was led to believe at a very tender age of 9 that this was my fault that this happened. So I didn't tell my parents about it because I was terrified that they were going to be like, what did you do to invite this? And so I never told them. And I was probably, oh, thanks, Kina. I was probably, I think maybe 19 or 20 when I finally told my mom. I still don't think I ever directly told my father. I was trying to think if I ever did. I think I let my mom handle that one. But it was like a really awkward and strange, shameful secret that I carried for many, many years on my own. I mean, thinking about that, that's like 12 years, right? Kind of like the woman with internal bleeding, right? That's this thing that just got carried around and carried around and carried around for all these years. And I've done all my own therapeutic work. It's not like this is a vulnerable story at this point for me to tell, but I didn't start telling my friends about this until this year. I think you were probably one of the first people I told. I told a couple other people as well that I was in Bible study with, but it's not like our Sunday group.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, it was that was sort of the environment growing up. And my brother was in and out of the house. He got, at one point he got sent to like a boarding school. He went to rehab a few times because he was doing, I don't even know what drugs he was doing. Quite honestly, it probably was weed. But because of the family system we were in, that was like, oh, he's got to go to rehab because he, he's smoking. I mean, right now, I don't think, oh gosh, what kids are now accessible to. I mean, weed doesn't seem like a big deal in my opinion anymore, but I mean, I hope my children never use it or anything, but at the time that was like horrific. And he was hanging out with all the alternative kids, right? Those ones that talked about death and were black and, oh wait, that's me. But at that time, it wasn't, obviously. I was like little Miss Goody Two Shoes. And I think that's part of the story that I kind of want to share a little bit about, was that, because my brother was so alternative and so like off the rocker, right? I had to be the good kid. I had to be the stable one. I had to be the one who like got all A's in school, who never tried any drugs. And like to this day, and people may find this hard to believe, but I've never tried an illegal substance. And the closest I got to breaking the law with substances was when I was like 20 and a half. I had a drink, my first drink, in college. Oh my goodness. So I'm really a good girl. I just have a potty mouth sometimes. But but maintaining that image, right? So then I can't share this story about what happened to me because then I'm not a good girl anymore, right? And I've been violated, and then that it takes away from my sanctity and the gift that I have to give my husband one day, right? Because that's a big pile of
Purity culture. Yeah.
purity
Baggage.
culture. And it was huge back then. Like I remember my father gave me my purity ring at like 12. You know, like I
Oh,
wasn't even thinking about boys at 12. I was like, what? What's sex? I don't have any interest in that. I don't know what that is. Like, I don't even like boys. Like,
it's so rough.
whatever.
Yeah.
So I remember that was like a big deal that happened. So I tell that part because it's relevant later. So I think that's the basic summary. My brother also went on to father a child at 16. So I think that probably exacerbated the anxiety in my parents about my sexual behavior because they're like, oh gosh, this has already happened to us once. It can't happen again, even though
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I had no intention at that time. I didn't even have anybody that was worth investigating at that time. I mean, high school was a rough time for me. It was a dry desert in terms of romantic relationships. But yes, so that's the sort of setting. Now I'm going to fast forward a little bit because I'd love to share this story. I feel like there's never enough time, and I don't want people to be like bored here. But I feel like that's important to understand sort of the wilderness story that I walked through. So you could imagine this girl at 17, 18, getting excited about going to college, and like I said, I was doing all the wickets. So I had straight A's. I had over 4.0 grade point average, like all the overachieving helicopter parented children in my social circle. So it wasn't too challenging for me to get into William and Mary, which is where I ended up going now. I don't know how many people in here are Virginia natives or no, but William and Mary at the time, at least, was considered one of the more prestigious of the Virginia schools, along with UVA. It was the liberal arts UVA, right? It's like where the people who didn't want to be engineers went. So once I got in, I remember the day I got my acceptance letter, and I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, I get out of here. I can figure out who I am now, because I'm not going to be under this oppressive regime of being in a role in my family unit. And in all fairness to my parents, right? It's not like my parents ever were like, this is what you have to be, or nasty about it. It just was sort of this unspoken expectation, kind of like with the couch, right? They said it once, maybe, or emphasized it through their behavior or their way of being loving, but it was always this expectation, like, oh no, you're going to go to college and you're going to become a professional. Like that's what you're going to do. And it was well-intentioned and loving and supportive, but it was pressure still. It was still an expectation. So when I got that acceptance letter, I remember the day I got it, like my parents were dealing with some trivial thing with my brother. And so I wasn't allowed to be excited about it because I made a big deal out of it. And my poor brother, who was going off to join the Navy or something, I don't know what he was doing at the time. I don't even remember. That's how survival mode my brain was about getting through this. It's like I go back and I can't remember dates or events in sequence. And neither can my parents. We've had lots of conversations in trying to do our own therapeutic work in getting through this, and we don't remember things. And it's a tribute to the human brain that it can survive that kind of thing, that it can be that resilient, that it can get through all of that. But there are limitations to what the brain can store. So, but anyway, so I got my letter. I wasn't allowed to be excited about it, but then eventually I think my brother gave me a half-hearted congratulations, I'm proud of you statement, which at the time I really couldn't accept or receive, just due to the nature of our relationship throughout the whole time, him getting all the attention for doing all the wrong things. Very much the prodigal son's brother, me. And so, maybe that would be the Bible character I probably could identify with the most, actually. But
I relate to the oldest son because the father runs to the prodigal son, throws a party for him. I don't even think the older son was invited. I don't even think the older son knew about that party. So I'm like, hey, I'm an oldest child.
Hey.
So anyway, keep going.
I did everything right. I honored you. I stayed here. Yeah, and I get no attention. But anyway, so I guess what I'd like to say is then I went to college. And that's when I met my dorm mate, who invited me to join the gospel choir. So we already kind of shared that story a little bit, but I have this awful, well, we won't call it awful because that sounds sort of pejorative, but I have this very enthusiastic way of being in which I hum and sing like wherever I go, and I have to like remind myself to turn it off or change the track sometimes because I'll sing like the same song over and over again and really annoy my family. So I would sing in the shower, and that's how she knew I could sing, because everybody sings best in the shower, let me tell you. The acoustics of the bathroom, I mean, it's just wonderful, and you create your own rhythms and harmonies and melodies. It's great. But so when I failed to make it into the Christian a cappella group, then she invited me to the gospel choir, and that's when my world totally got flipped upside down, and I was like, holy crap. Sorry, this is a Christian place. Ooh, that's what I said. Okay, so trigger warning, you can go put it back at the beginning of the thing. But I was so blown away, right, by what God was going to show me in this place that was so new and so different and so exciting and at the same time so terrifying, right? Because when we start to question our privilege, like, it's sort of like questioning the Bible. It just opens everything, and you're like, oh my goodness, I'm part of this system and I'm terrified and I don't want to be part of the system anymore, but I still am, and what do I do with that, and how do I wrestle with that, and how do I help people and serve people and understand people? And by the end of my college degree, I figured out that the best thing I could do to be an advocate is to be a listener, which was great because that was the career path I was headed towards. But so anyway, so freshman year, I mean, there was a lot that happened that was bad, but we're going to just skip through that wilderness and we're going to go right to sophomore year. So the summer of my freshman year is when I met the love of my life, my ride or die, Michael, and we had both been through nepotism, gotten jobs where our dads worked, and our dads worked together for over 30 years. Wow. And we had met, we found out at a company picnic when I was like 2 and he was like 5. Wow. And I came up to my mom afterward and I said, this boy named Michael's riding around on a big wheel and he's throwing rocks at me. And so that's how we know that we met at this picnic. I did not know that. That's cool. So we always joked that he was chasing me since he was 5, Yeah. Since I'm so unattainable. Yeah. But so that was, but we actually met as adults, at this job, and we were interns, and our security clearances hadn't cleared. So there was literally no work for us to do. So we were like shredding non-classified documents all day, like in a closet. Like they put all the interns in a closet and we were shredding documents. So suffice to say, my husband and I had a long time to get to know each other because there was nothing to do for 8 hours but talk to each other. It was sort of like intensive dating, right? It was and I'm telling you, it's now I can't shred paper without thinking about romance. It's just one of those things. But it so happened that summer also I was planning to study abroad in England for 5 weeks. So I was really only on the job for like 3.5 or something like that. But before I left for my study abroad, and I knew he was the one. We went on a few dates, the awkward first dates, which are always fun when you're like 19 and everything's exciting and you're like, ah! But then every day when I arrived in England, I had a letter waiting. And when I arrived to the university in Cambridge, the porter was like, are you this person? Here's all your letters. He was like irritated because Michael knew it took like 2 weeks for a letter to get there. So he wrote a bunch in advance so that I would have them there when I arrived. And I was like, this guy is too nice. Like, I can't walk away from this. This guy like loves me. I have to like deal with this reality that this man loves me. But of course I haven't gotten to the big wilderness thing, which is that he was Catholic. Now, you know what it's like to marry an Irish Catholic, we share that experience, you and I, but I was raised in a fundamental home. And so this idea of like, oh, bringing the Catholic guy home, like, what are we going to do with that? I think ultimately my parents were cool, but then I was like, am I going to fit in with their family? And thankfully my sister-in-law paved the way. The middle brother married a Protestant woman who is amazing. I love her. I love all my sisters-in-law. I mean, I have married into the best family ever. I mean, really. But I was like terrified that, me not being Catholic was going to be like a deal breaker for them. Because I was young and insecure, and that's what we do when we're young and insecure. We create problems that don't exist. So I created this problem and dwelled on it for many years. And that was the headspace I was in as I entered my sophomore year. It was like, I am madly in love with this guy. I've known him for 8 weeks. I'm going into my sophomore year of college. I've got a lot more to do before I'm going to marry anybody. Like, can I do this? Can I long distance date somebody for 8, 9, 10 years? Who knows how long it's going to be till we're able to get married? And he was at the time going to Vanderbilt and I was at William and Mary. So he's in Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm here in Williamsburg. And that was pretty rough. As time went on, we got proximity closer and closer. So after he finished his undergrad, he was 1 year ahead of me. He went to Delaware, University of Delaware. So then we were Delaware and Williamsburg. And then I started my master's up here in DC. So then we were like 2 hours. And then he was finally done and he got a job and we were both in DC. And then that's when we were like, we better get married now while we're still in the same area. Yes. But it was a long journey. So that was going on and that was the headspace I was in. Because I've talked so much and there's still so much story I want to share. But but I'll end with this great story and then we'll do another one, Lauren. We'll come back.
Yeah, we're going to have to because people are going to be demanding it. Anyway.
So this is part 1, guys. And if you want part 2, you have to, donate to Messiah. No, I'm just kidding. But so I'm going to conclude the story with the story I want to tell because I think it's really useful. And then I'll provide the commentary of what God's taught me through this. But so I'm in my sophomore year. I get through that. I'm dating this guy. I'm madly in love with him. I see him 3 times a year. We get to summer and we start to, see each other more. It's lovely. It's wonderful being home. And, having each other to rely on and talk to.
You hear me?
Yeah, I got you now.
Sorry, I was feeling rough and I was like, I can't help you.
No,
anyway,
not right now. No, we're busy. Okay. Hey, well, that's having kids, right? That's right there. That's what it looks like in action. So anyway, but the point was, like, we were cruising along with the dating thing. Now we'd been together about a year, and we celebrated our first year anniversary. I think I put that picture up on Facebook the other day, and I had this rocking 20-year-old body, and things were really good for me. Going into my junior year, I was really excited. I was like, okay, I'm getting into a groove. I like my major. I can see that like one day there's going to be a job for me and I'm going to be this career woman that I've always wanted to be because I was told that's what I wanted to be. And it kind of felt right. So I went with it. And so I go into my junior year and I'm realizing that I'm doing a lot of comparing. Right. So I have, this long distance boyfriend whom I love, like with all my heart at this point. I mean, a year and I'm invested. There's no way I'm walking away from this. But it was really hard. It was really hard because there were lots of questions that we were asking each other that we didn't have answers to yet. And I'll have to have another conversation about that. But we ended up resolving them, obviously. We've been married now for 14 years. So it's we've solved those issues. But lots of questions, lots of anxiety, lots of worry. Like, am I enough? Am I pretty enough? And I was a virgin until I got married, y'all. So that's how I say it, at least, because I don't consider what happened to me as a child to be a violation of that. But, I hadn't ever engaged with a man in any kind of physical way until I met Michael. And so that he was my first everything, first kiss, first handhold, first, make out in the car. We all had those. Right? Those are great.
Where are we going with this? Yeah, that's cool.
But yeah, so it's that, right? He was my first for everything, and I was his first for everything too. So that was kind of special. But the point was, I was very wrapped up in this guy, and I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my major because everyone was like, what are you going to do, white girl with a black studies major? And, that's the question that everybody asked in junior years, like, what are you going to do now? And I was like, whatever God leads, because I don't really know. So that's the position I was in. So here's the story. This is my favorite story. It makes me look absolutely neurotic, but it also makes the other girl look neurotic. So I feel like it balances out. So here it is. Here's the story. So, I was living in this dormitory style apartments kind of thing. And so I had my own single, but then we shared like the communal bathroom, and it was one of those situations where we were all juniors, so you never knew what gender person you were going to run into in the bathroom. So you kind of shifted your schedule so that you knew, like, okay, well, around this time of the day, there's nobody in there that's not going to be my biological gender here. So maybe I can go and be undignified in the bathroom. But there was one young woman who would get ready in the morning alongside me, and we probably had the same time, first class or something, but she was always there when I would go in the bathroom in the morning. And she was one of these perfect, just absolutely perfect women, just flawless skin, just the right weight, not too thin, not too fat. And she always had this just gorgeous blonde ponytail that would just hang just perfectly down her back. And so I'm painting the picture of this girl for you guys so you can visualize this as we talk about it. At the time, my hair was considerably longer and I looked more traditionally feminine, I guess. At the time, I was probably, I don't know, 110 pounds or something. I mean, I was really small. So we would meet at the sinks in the bathroom because there were about 4 sinks that would line up. And we would brush our teeth around the same time. So first day, we kind of encounter each other. We never talked to each other. We just sort of, gave the nod or the acknowledgement as we walked up to the sink. So I nodded at her the day, and that the story begins. And she was already brushing her teeth at the time, so she didn't really acknowledge me. So then I picked up my toothbrush and I started brushing my teeth. And I noticed that the girl was still brushing her teeth when I was about ready to finish. So I was like, okay, no big deal, whatever, I'll finish. And then she'll finish her teeth. And, she's got better oral hygiene. That's why she looks the way she does. So I finished brushing my teeth, and then she finished, and I walked out the bathroom thinking nothing of it. I was like, okay, whatever. I came back the next day, and we were getting ready at the same time again. I was like, oh, what a coincidence. So we start brushing our teeth. I was like, I'm going to go a little longer because I think this girl's got something to her system here because, she looks great. So maybe I should model myself after her. So I'm brushing my teeth. I'm waiting for her to finish, because I'm thinking, oh, well, she probably does it the full 3 minutes. So maybe I can use her as like a metric. The girl keeps brushing her teeth like she's waiting for something. And I was like, okay, what's happening here? So then I finished brushing mine, and then she proceeds to spit into the sink. So then I'm like, okay, that's weird. Like, whatever's going on here is not normal. Like, this is not a normal interaction. Like, the time before, she had started before me and then finished after me. And then this time we were starting at the same time, and she decided she had to finish after me. So the just cantankerous and neurotic side of myself came out. And I was like, I want to see if this is a trend. So the next day I put on my watch. And I was like, okay, I'm going to time this shenanigans. So I walked into the bathroom. She's there, and we, fake smile at each other, and we get to brushing our teeth. So I'm watching my watch. And I'm like, I'm going to go for 5 minutes this time. And we're going to see let's see if this girl can keep up with me. And so, of course, 5 minutes goes, and I'm like, okay, I'm done. And I spit, and then she spits.
Oh my gosh.
So now I'm really raged up. I'm like, yes, this is exactly the kind of person that William and Mary attracts. We're all a little borderline OCD, but this is really fun. So I'm going to go push the button on this and do it at least one more time. So I've got my watch, and I put the timer on for 7 minutes. Okay. So we're in the bathroom at the same time.
This is so funny.
This is a great story. I love this story. I tell it all the time. Sometimes it's told better than others, but I think I'm doing okay today. So we're brushing. 7 minutes. 7 minutes. I spit, and then she spits. And I can kind of tell she's getting like a little angry. Like she's got this like, one eyebrow out of place, which is unusual for her because typically she doesn't act angry. She's very neutral and, plastic. So I was like, okay, I didn't break her at 7 minutes. So it's going to be 9. We are going in there 9 minutes. I don't care if I'm late to class. I am proving this point that this girl is crazy. Of course, not thinking about at the time how crazy I was, right? I mean, this is the most neurotic thing I think I've ever done in my life. And I've done some pretty neurotic things. But anyway, so I walked down there, poised, ready to go. 9 minutes. Now, I don't know if any of y'all have ever brushed your teeth for more than like 4 minutes.
It's like hilarious that she didn't, neither of you were like, what's going on here?
No, we didn't say anything. This was a silent competition, Lauren. Someone was gonna win. This is the grand championship right here. Like, we were going for the belt, right? So I'm going in there. But my point is, if you've never brushed your teeth for more than about 4 minutes, you have never experienced how disgusting it is and how distasteful it is, right? I mean, you're out of toothpaste, you're full of slather. I mean, you just want to get it out of your mouth. It's so gross. And I was grateful I hadn't eaten anything really nasty that morning for breakfast or something, because I feel like that would have revisited itself too. So 9 minutes. 9 minutes. And like, by the time I pull my toothbrush out, like, the bristles are all like funky and weird. And so I was just like, okay, I'm going to finish this with some dignity. So I spit into the sink. I dignified my face, cleaned myself up, made myself look as good as I could look at, whatever it was, 9 in the morning. Yeah, your teeth are hurting just thinking about it. I know, it was so unpleasant. Everything about it was so unpleasant. And that, I think, is what points to the real problem here. But anyway, I'll say more about that in a minute. So 9 minutes, I dignify my face, I'm put together, I look over at her and I go, you win. And I walked out of the bathroom and I never saw that girl again.
Oh my God.
Never was in the bathroom at the same time I was.
I had like an angel or something, like a toothbrushing angel that never. Anyway, that's funny.
Yeah, maybe it was all a mirage or something, but sent by God to teach me something. So anyway, but that reality, right, of like, we get into competition so quickly and so easily, and we get into comparisons so quickly and so easily, and especially those of us who are educated and trying to be the best person we can be, and who are self-aware and know that there's always room for improvement. We're growth mindseted, right? We're like, oh, we can just always be better at something. And the truth is, yeah, that's probably true. However, if we get into a comparison game to improve ourselves, then we get into some really dark places. So now I'm going to tie it back to the couch. Okay, so we're going to come full circle and we're going to wrap up this story, because everybody's been so loving and attentive, and I hope you've enjoyed the story as much as I've enjoyed sharing it. But the couch, right? This couch where we're not allowed to be messy, where we're not allowed to be neurotic, right? We're not allowed to be our true selves, right? And I think for so long I had viewed God that way, and it was really problematic and a hardship for me. And in that moment, after I told that story, of course, to my gay best friend who loved it, and we still talk about it to this day. But after I shared it with him, he said, he said something, I don't remember. I think he just laughed. But in that moment of him just like having a hilarious moment with me, I realized, like, how am I extrapolating this to all areas of my life? Like, in what other ways am I comparing my success or my failure to the people around me? Mm-hmm. And that moment in time was the clearest moment I can remember where God first started working on this piece of myself. Now, I've no way ended this story, and I'm sure like another time I'll tell more of it, hopefully. But at that moment in time, I was like, ooh, there's a catch in my spirit here that I need to just stop comparing to everyone around me and all these things and all these shoulds and shouldn'ts that I've taken on as part of my identity, really, in many ways, my good girl identity, and like my, oh, well, aren't I the good little Protestant because I'm concerned about marrying a Catholic? And I was like, why am I holding on to this stuff? And I really heard, I'll fast forward in my narrative here, that I, recently, within the last 5 years, God's really been hammering this one out in me, which is why I chose to share it today. But God has repeatedly shown me time and time again that he is not disappointed in me.
Mhm.
And I think that was a lesson that my parents, I mean, they always said it. They always said how proud they were of me, how great it was that I was achieving all these wonderful things and doing these things for God. And like even to this day, my mom's like, I'm so proud of you. Like I think it's so cool that you help people and do all these things. But for me, it wasn't about making people proud. It was about not disappointing people.
Yeah.
And so all those words of affirmation, all that kindness, that warmth, that like positive reinforcement did nothing to absolve that, because I felt fundamentally that, God created me with all this aptitude, right? And if I'm not thin and perfect at everything I do and looking like this girl in the bathroom, right? Plastic and perfect, then am I really living up to my full potential? And then how do I not disappoint God? And I think, in our Bible studies, I mean, gosh, the things we've been reading about that Rachel Held Evans has written, the conversations we've had, we've been talking a lot about, just accepting that you are enough and that God's gospel was for you. Like it's for you, not for who you could be or what you're supposed to be, but it's really about just allowing God to love you as you are. And I will never brush my teeth again for 10 minutes because it was such an unpleasant experience. But I do sometimes find myself brushing against these comparisons. And especially in my own life with my brother, he passed November 15th, 2018, very unexpectedly, of just a combination of really bad, just really bad variables just ended up in his life. So I had to wrestle with, okay, now the artist is gone. So can I be the artist now? Can I assume that identity a little bit or take some of that in? And so wrestling sort of with the lack of perfection in that area, because for, I don't know, 20 years of my life, that part's been dormant.
Yeah.
And repressed and said, no, that's not as important as, performing to the wickets or getting your license or making lots of money or any of these other things that other people had said were the expectations. And I think I'm going to have to stop myself there, because if I don't, I'll just keep talking for hours and hours and hours. And you guys have been just wonderful. And I'm so glad that you were here to hear it. And
That's okay.
I'll do it to another time.
Yeah, we'll have to. This is a good stopping point, but I am curious because there's like things that I know that you didn't get to. And I'm like, but I wanted to know about that. I do think that, we have this tendency to compare ourselves. And like we said at the very beginning, God gives all of us gifts. And like, so I'll compare my giftedness or whatever to other people doing similar things. And then like, if you don't fit the mold, like you're never going to be happy, so it's hard to just take yourself out of that.
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to say to you is that I really appreciate your story and your willingness to share it, because I think there's a lot of people in our society who experience sexual violence, for one.
Yeah.
And a lot of other things that we never talk about. Now my 4-year-old's in here. Hold on one second. And let me get my train of thought back. Anyway, if we can't talk about that in the context of the church, where is anybody going to receive healing, And so you sharing your story is healing for all of us who get to hear it, and it provides hope, So thank you very, very much. And
a reminder that you don't have to carry it anymore if you've been carrying it. That you were, if you were a victim, or if you know a victim, or maybe you were a perpetrator, right? And you want to bring that before the Lord and just put it out there and say, okay, how do I move through this, God? And asking for help, and obviously going and seeing a trained professional counselor to talk through it.
For sure.
All of us.
There's absolutely no wilderness that God cannot deliver us from, no matter what our role is. Oh my gosh. I'm trying to stay focused with Rory going, Mom! So anyway,
I know that feeling.
And thank you so much. And thank you for everybody watching it. And
thanks for coming, guys. It makes it feel more real when I can put the faces to the people who are experiencing my story. It's definitely helpful. I love you all. I look forward to seeing most most of you in our Sunday morning talk, and now you know a little bit more about me too. So
Yeah.
you'll hopefully feel more comfortable to be yourselves as well
All
as a
right.
result of hearing my story. So.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much. And I'm going to pray for peace upon all of you, all of this whole computer that I'm enveloping, all peace. Goodbye. Everybody.
All right, bye, everybody. Thanks for popping on.